in the heart of a raging wildfire tearing through Los Angeles. Keanu Reeves spotted a massive, injured dog trapped beneath a fallen tree. Its leg was broken, and it howled in pain, unable to escape the advancing flames. Without a second thought, Keanu raced into the inferno, risking his own life to free the helpless creature. What he didn't realize was that this act of courage would lead to a shocking discovery, because the dog he saved wasn't a dog at all. January 10th, 2025, was a day Los Angeles burned, not just in the wildfire consuming the hills, but in the hearts of its people. Gripped by fear and helplessness, the Santa Ana winds raged, fanning the flames into an unstoppable inferno that devoured everything in its path. The once vivid blue skies turned into an angry orange haze, ash raining down like foreboding snow. For miles, the roar of the fire drowned out everything, the kind of destruction that left no time for second chances. Keanu Reeves drove along the winding canyon road, his focus sharp, his chest tightened as he glanced toward the hills, now engulfed in flames that spread faster than anyone could contain. He should have been far from this chaos, safe like most of the city had been ordered to be. But something gnawed at his gut, a pull he couldn't ignore. Suddenly, movement broke through the smoky horizon. A flash of gold and rust staggered onto the road, collapsing just beyond his headlights. Keanu slammed the brakes, his tires skidding on ash-coated asphalt. He threw open the car door, the blistering heat slamming into him like a physical force. Through the smoke, he saw it. A large animal sprawled on the ground, trembling and weak. As he moved closer, his heart sank. The creature, a dog, or so it seemed at first glance, was covered in soot and dirt. Its golden brown coat, streaked with fiery hues, glimmered faintly in the flickering light. Its legs sprawled awkwardly, one bent at a wrong angle, and its sides heaved with shallow, labored breaths. It looked up at him with piercing golden eyes filled not with fear, but with exhaustion and quiet determination. The animal let out a low, mournful whine, as if begging for help yet bracing itself for disappointment. Keanu knelt, his voice soft but firm. "Hey there, buddy. I've got you. You're not alone anymore." The dog flinched at his approach, its ears flattening against its head. For a moment, Keanu froze, holding his hands out in a gesture of calm. "It's okay," he whispered, his voice cutting through the roar of the fire. "I'm not going to hurt you." The creature stared at him, his body trembling from pain and exhaustion. Slowly, its gaze softened, the tension in its muscles easing. Keanu could feel its trust, a fragile thread, but enough to take a chance. Behind them, the flames surged, creeping closer with every crackle of dry brush. Keanu's jaw tightened as he assessed the animal's condition. It wasn't going to make it out on its own. He didn't have time to think. Sliding off his jacket, he carefully draped it over the dog's back, shielding it from the ash and embers swirling in the air. Then, with a grunt of effort, he scooped the animal into his arms. It whimpered softly but didn't resist, its head resting against his chest as if surrendering to his protection. The heat was unbearable, the smoke clawing at his throat and stinging his eyes. But Keanu pressed on. Each step felt heavier than the last, his legs aching under the weight of the creature and his own burning lungs. The fire snapped at his heels, its glow casting long, menacing shadows across the ground. "Almost there," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the roaring flames. The dog's breathing was faint, but steady, its golden eyes fluttering open now and then to look at him with something that felt almost like gratitude. Finally, the smoke thinned, and Keanu stumbled out onto the road, his car barely visible through the ash-filled air. A firefighter rushed toward him, disbelief etched on his soot-streaked face. "Are you insane? That fire's too dangerous. You could have been caught." Keanu didn't answer. He knelt down, gently placing the dog on the ground. His body trembled, its golden brown fur now streaked with soot and blood, but its eyes remained locked on his, even as paramedics arrived, tending to both the animal's injuries and Keanu's burns. The dog didn't look away. Keanu sat back, his chest heaving as the adrenaline drained from his body. His hands shook as he ran them through his ash-covered hair. But his gaze never left the creature lying before him. It was more than relief that washed over him. It was connection. In its desperate golden eyes, he saw something familiar, a resilience, a fight, and a quiet strength that mirrored his own. "Rest easy," he whispered, brushing a hand over its fur. "You're safe now." The dog let out a soft whimper, its eyes fluttering closed as exhaustion overtook it. And in that moment, Keanu felt something shift within him. He had saved it from the flames. But somehow, he knew the creature had given him something in return, something he didn't yet understand. What he couldn't have imagined was that this act of bravery was only the beginning, because the animal he had risked his life to save wasn't just any dog. It was something extraordinary. The drive back to Keanu's home was steeped in a heavy silence, broken only by the shallow breaths of the animal lying in the back seat. Its golden brown coat, streaked with soot and blood, gleamed faintly under the dim interior light. Despite its injuries, the creature seemed calmer now, its piercing golden eyes half closed but still flicking toward Keanu with quiet trust. As the city lights faded behind them, Keanu's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his thoughts a storm of questions. What kind of dog was this? Or was it even a dog at all? When he pulled into the driveway of his secluded home, Keanu wasted no time, cradling the animal in his arms. He carried it inside and gently laid it on a thick blanket by the fireplace. The room was bathed in a warm, flickering glow, a stark contrast to the chaos they had just escaped. Keanu knelt beside the creature, carefully cleaning its wounds and inspecting its injured leg. The animal let out a low whimper but didn't pull away, its trust in him growing with every passing moment. "You're a fighter. I'll give you that," Keanu murmured, his voice steady as he worked. "But what were you doing out there, all alone?" The creature's ears twitched at his voice, and for a moment, his golden eyes locked onto his, filled with an almost human-like depth. Keanu felt a strange pang in his chest, as if the animal was trying to tell him something he couldn't quite grasp. That night, Keanu slept on the couch, close enough to keep an eye on the creature. He awoke to the faint sound of movement and sat up to find it standing unsteadily by the window, its silhouette framed by the first light of dawn. Its posture was regal, its gaze fixed on the distant hills as if longing for something lost. For the first time, Keanu truly noticed its size, its powerful build, and the way its fur shimmered in the soft morning light. This wasn't like any dog he'd ever seen. Over the next few days, Keanu focused on helping the animal recover. It began to walk again, favoring its injured leg but moving with a surprising grace that caught Keanu off guard. Each step seemed deliberate, almost calculated, as if the creature was more than just surviving, it was adapting. It ate sparingly, preferring raw meat over the kibble Keanu had offered, and its behavior was calm yet watchful, always observing, always listening. One evening, as Keanu sat reading in the living room, a soft, haunting sound filled the air. He looked up to see the creature standing by the open patio door, its head tilted back as it let out a low, mournful howl. The sound sent a chill through Keanu's spine, not out of fear, but out of awe. It was as if the animal was calling out to something far beyond the hills, something primal and ancient. "You're not just a dog, are you?" Keanu said softly, his voice breaking the silence. The creature turned to him, its golden eyes glowing in the dim light. It held his gaze for a long moment before padding over to him and resting its head on his knee, his trust unmistakable. The next morning, Keanu decided it was time to seek answers. He took the creature to a nearby vet, Dr. Elena Hart, someone he trusted for her compassion and expertise. As he carried the animal into the clinic, every eye in the room turned toward them. The creature didn't bark or growl, but its sheer presence commanded attention. Its golden eyes scanned the room, and for a brief moment, the other animals fell silent, as if instinctively recognizing it as something different. Dr. Hart greeted them warmly, but her expression shifted as she examined the creature. She ran her hands along its fur, checked its teeth, and studied its posture. The more she observed, the deeper her brow furrowed. Finally, she stepped back and crossed her arms, her tone cautious but firm. "Keanu," she began, "this is no ordinary animal." "What do you mean?" he asked, though deep down, he already knew the answer. Dr. Hart hesitated, then gestured for him to follow her into her office. Once inside, she pulled up several images on her computer: wolves, wolf-dog hybrids, and wild canine breeds. One by one, the similarities became impossible to ignore. The creature's size, its coat, the way it moved, it all pointed to one conclusion. "This isn't a dog," Dr. Hart said finally. "It's a wolf, a pure wolf, by the looks of it. Maybe even a Canadian black wolf, though its coat suggests a unique lineage." Keanu's breath caught. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. A wolf, not just any animal, but a wild, untamed predator. And yet, as he glanced back at the creature waiting patiently by the door, its golden eyes meeting his, all he could feel was the bond they had formed. Wolf or not, this animal had trusted him, and he wasn't about to abandon it now. What he didn't yet realize was that their journey was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The drive home from the vet was quiet, but Keanu's thoughts were anything but. The word wolf echoed in his mind, heavy with questions and uncertainty. Shadow, because that's what the creature had come to mean to him. A quiet protector lay in the back seat, his golden eyes steady and calm as if sensing Keanu's inner turmoil. How could something so wild, so untamed, have formed such a bond with him? And what would happen if the world found out? Back at the house, Shadow stepped out of the car and onto the gravel driveway, his movements fluid despite the lingering soreness in his leg. Keanu watched him pause at the edge of the property, his nose lifting to catch the breeze, his ears swiveling toward a sound only he could hear. For a moment, Shadow stood perfectly still, a creature of the wilderness caught in the threshold between two worlds. "Come on, buddy," Keanu called softly, and just like that, the wolf turned and padded silently after him, choosing to stay by his side. The days that followed were filled with an uneasy rhythm. Keanu did his best to create a routine for Shadow, but there was no denying the challenge of keeping a wild animal in a suburban home. Shadow's instincts were razor-sharp. He moved with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly, and his eyes always carried a depth that made Keanu wonder just how much this wolf understood. Then, late one evening, a knock shattered the quiet. Keanu opened the door to find a man in uniform standing on his porch, the patch on his chest unmistakable: wildlife enforcement. "Mr. Reeves," the officer began, his tone firm but professional. "We've received reports about a wolf being kept on this property." Keanu felt his stomach drop. He had known this moment would come, but it didn't make it any easier. "Shadow isn't dangerous," he said evenly. "I've been taking care of him since I rescued him from the fire." The officer's gaze shifted toward the open doorway, where Shadow now stood, his golden eyes fixed on the stranger. He didn't growl or bark, but his presence was commanding enough to make the officer take a small step back. "I don't doubt your intentions, Mr. Reeves," the officer said, clearing his throat. "But wolves are protected under federal and state laws. Keeping one as a pet isn't legal unless specific conditions are met. I'll need to inspect the property and evaluate the situation." Keanu nodded, stepping aside to let the man in. Shadow followed them closely, his movements silent but deliberate, his eyes never leaving the officer. As the inspection began, Keanu couldn't shake the tension in his chest. He had done his best to create a safe environment for Shadow, but he knew it might not be enough. The officer took his time, inspecting every corner of the property, from the backyard to the interior of the house. When he was finished, he turned to Keanu, his expression unreadable. "I can see you've taken good care of him," the officer said. But this isn't an ideal setup for a wild animal. If you want to keep him, you'll need to relocate to a more suitable property and apply for a wildlife caretaker's permit. You have 3 weeks to meet the requirements. If you don't, I'll have no choice but to transfer him to a sanctuary. The words hit Keanu like a punch to the gut. Shadow, his loyal companion, wasn't just a pet, he was family. The thought of losing him was unbearable. I'll do it, Keanu said firmly. Whatever it takes. The next few days were a blur of activity. Keanu sold off a significant portion of his assets to purchase a small plot of land in the foothills, far from the prying eyes of neighbors and authorities. He worked tirelessly to build an enclosure that met every regulation, pouring his energy into creating a space where Shadow could roam freely while still staying close. Shadow, as always, stayed by his side. He seemed to sense Keanu's determination, often nudging him gently with his nose or resting his head on Keanu's knee during breaks. It was as if the wolf was reminding him, in his quiet way, that they were in this together. But as the deadline approached, a new challenge arose. Late one afternoon, while Keanu was working on the enclosure, the sky darkened with an ominous haze. The smell of smoke drifted on the wind, and Shadow's ears pricked forward, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Keanu froze, his heart sinking. Another wildfire. The flames moved fast, carried by the dry wind, and within minutes, the air was thick with smoke. Keanu grabbed his emergency bag and turned to Shadow. "We have to go," he said urgently. But Shadow didn't move. His golden eyes locked onto the horizon, his body tense as if bracing for something. "Shadow," Keanu called, but the wolf had already taken off, sprinting toward the edge of the property. Keanu ran after him, the smoke stinging his lungs as he shouted his companion's name. When he finally caught up, he saw Shadow standing near the treeline, pawing at the ground. Keanu realized with a start that the wolf had uncovered a narrow trail leading away from the flames. "You incredible creature," Keanu muttered, a mix of awe and relief washing over him. Shadow led the way down the trail, his movements swift and purposeful, and Keanu followed close behind. The fire roared in the distance, but Shadow's instincts guided them through the chaos, always one step ahead of the advancing flames. When they finally emerged from the forest, smoke rising behind them like a ghost, Keanu dropped to his knees, gasping for air. Shadow stood beside him, his golden eyes calm and steady, as if he had known all along they would make it out. Keanu reached out, his hand resting on Shadow's fur. "You saved us," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Shadow leaned into his touch, his loyalty and trust as unshakable as ever. As the fire crews worked to contain the blaze, Keanu looked out over the charred landscape and felt a renewed sense of purpose. Shadow wasn't just a wolf. He was a survivor, a protector, and a reminder of the bond that could exist between man and nature. Together, they had faced the fire and come out stronger. And as Keanu stood with Shadow by his side, he knew their journey was far from over. The call came in the dead of night. Keanu had just settled into bed, the quiet hum of the countryside lulling him into a rare moment of calm. Shadow lay curled at the foot of the bed, his ears twitching as if he sensed something stirring in the distance. Then the phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the silence. Keanu answered, his voice rough with sleep. "Reeves?" came the voice on the other end. It was an old friend, a firefighter he'd worked with briefly on a charity project years ago. "I hate to call you this late, but we're in trouble. Another wildfire's broken out near Griffith Park, and it's spreading fast. We've got people missing, kids, families, and we're short on hands. I know you've got some experience with search and rescue, and I've heard about your companion." Keanu glanced at Shadow, who was now wide awake. His golden eyes locked on Keanu as if he understood every word. The thought of taking Shadow into the heart of another fire made Keanu's chest tighten. But he couldn't ignore the urgency in his friend's voice. "We'll be there," Keanu said, his voice steady despite the knot forming in his stomach. The drive to Griffith Park was tense, the darkened skyline glowing faintly with the orange light of the advancing flames. As they neared the staging area, the sound of sirens and the hum of helicopters filled the air. Firefighters moved with purpose, their faces grim as they coordinated efforts to contain the blaze. Keanu parked and stepped out, Shadow leaping gracefully from the passenger seat to stand by his side. The wolf's posture was alert, his ears swiveling to catch every sound, his nose twitching as he took in the scent of smoke and fear. Keanu's friend, Captain Daniels, approached, his expression a mix of relief and hesitation as his eyes fell on Shadow. "Is he safe?" Daniels asked, his voice low. Keanu placed a reassuring hand on Shadow's head. "Safer than most people here," he said with a faint smile. "What's the situation?" Daniels gestured toward the smoking hills. "We've got reports of a family trapped somewhere in the northeast sector. It's rough terrain, and the fire's moving fast. We're focusing on containment, but we need someone to get in there and bring them out." Keanu nodded, his resolve firm. "We'll do it." Daniels hesitated, then handed Keanu a radio. "Stay in contact, and good luck." Keanu and Shadow moved quickly, the roar of the fire growing louder as they entered the forest. The heat was oppressive, the smoke thick in the air, but Shadow's instincts guided them through the chaos. His ears twitched, his nose working tirelessly as he sniffed the ground and the air. Keanu followed close behind, his heart pounding as he kept his eyes on the wolf's every movement. Then, Shadow stopped abruptly, his body tense as he let out a low bark. Keanu froze, his eyes following Shadow's gaze to a small, half-collapsed cabin barely visible through the smoke. A faint sound reached Keanu's ears, a child's cry. "Good boy," Keanu whispered, his voice tight with urgency. "Let's go." They approached the cabin carefully, the heat almost unbearable as flames licked at the dry brush nearby. Keanu kicked the door open, coughing as smoke billowed out. Inside, he found a woman and 2 children huddled in a corner, their faces streaked with soot and tears. "We're here to help," Keanu said, his voice calm despite the chaos. "Come on. We've got to move." The woman clutched her children, her eyes wide with fear. I can't walk. My leg." Keanu glanced at Shadow, who was already moving to the children's side, nuzzling them gently as if to reassure them. "Follow him," Keanu instructed the kids. "He'll lead you out." The children hesitated for a moment, but Shadow's steady presence seemed to calm them. They clung to each other as they followed the wolf toward the door. Keanu knelt beside the woman, lifting her carefully despite the weight. "We'll make it," he said firmly. "Just hold on." The journey back was harrowing. The fire had spread closer, the air thick with smoke and ash. Keanu's muscles burned with the effort of carrying the woman, but he kept moving, his focus fixed on Shadow, who guided the children with precision and care. When they finally broke through the tree line and into the open, Keanu felt a wave of relief as firefighters rushed to their aid. Shadow stayed close, his golden eyes scanning the scene as if ensuring everyone was safe. The children clung to him, their fear melting into gratitude as they stroked his fur. For a moment, the chaos faded, replaced by the quiet heroism of a wolf who had defied every expectation. As Keanu stood with Shadow by his side, watching the reunited family embrace, he felt a deep sense of purpose settle over him. Shadow wasn't just a survivor, he was a protector, a symbol of loyalty and courage in the face of unimaginable danger. Later, as they drove home in the quiet aftermath of the rescue, Keanu glanced at Shadow, who lay stretched out in the back seat, his golden eyes flickering open to meet Keanu's gaze. "We did good today," Keanu said softly, a smile tugging at his lips. "You're incredible. You know that." Shadow let out a low, contented huff, and Keanu chuckled. Together, they had faced the flames once again, proving that even in the heart of chaos, courage and loyalty could shine brighter than any fire. The wildfire raged with a ferocity Keanu hadn't seen before, consuming everything in its path. Embers rained from the sky, carried by the relentless wind, as firefighters scrambled to protect the lives still at risk. Keanu and Shadow had already saved one family that night, but the radio crackled with another desperate call. A group of hikers was trapped near the base of the canyon, where the fire was advancing fastest. Keanu's chest tightened as he glanced at Shadow, who stood alert beside him, his golden eyes gleaming in the firelight. The wolf's fur was streaked with soot, his breaths quickened from exhaustion, but his resolve hadn't faltered. "One more," Keanu said softly, crouching to meet Shadow's gaze. "Just one more, buddy." Shadow let out a low bark, his tail flicking as if to say, "I'm ready." They moved quickly, weaving through the smoke-choked forest toward the canyon. The heat was almost unbearable, the ground beneath them scorched and unstable. Keanu's muscles burned with each step, but Shadow pressed on ahead, his sharp instincts guiding them closer to the trapped hikers. Suddenly, Shadow stopped, his body rigid as he sniffed the air. Keanu followed his gaze to a narrow ravine. From the depths below came the faint sound of voices, frantic, pleading. "They're down there," Keanu murmured, gripping his radio. "We've found them." The ravine was steep, the descent treacherous. Keanu lowered himself carefully, the sharp edges of the rocks cutting into his gloves. Shadow followed nimbly, his paws finding secure footing where Keanu struggled. When they reached the bottom, they found two hikers, an older man and a teenage girl, huddled together, their faces pale and streaked with soot. "We're here to get you out," Keanu said, his voice calm but firm. "Can you walk?" The man shook his head, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. The girl clung to him, her eyes wide with fear. "The fire's getting closer," she whispered. "We don't have much time." Keanu glanced back up the ravine, where flames were already licking at the edge. "Shadow," he said, his voice steady. The wolf stepped forward, nudging the girl gently with his nose. "He'll lead you up. Just follow him." The girl hesitated but nodded, her trust in the wolf outweighing her fear. Shadow turned, his movements precise and deliberate as he began guiding her up the narrow path. Keanu knelt beside the man, slipping his arms under him. "This is going to hurt," he warned, lifting him carefully. The man groaned in pain but held on as Keanu began the grueling climb. Halfway up, the ground beneath them gave a violent shudder. Rocks tumbled down the slope, and Keanu barely managed to brace himself as the ravine began to collapse. Above them, Shadow turned back, barking urgently. Keanu looked up just in time to see a massive burning branch crashing toward them. In an instant, Shadow moved. He leapt toward Keanu and the injured man, his powerful body slamming into them, knocking them clear of the falling debris. The branch hit the ground with a deafening thud, scattering embers and ash. Shadow let out a sharp yelp, his body pinned beneath the heavy wood. "Shadow!" Keanu shouted, his heart lurching as he scrambled to his feet. The wolf's sides heaved, his golden eyes flickering as he struggled to move. Keanu dropped to his knees, his hands trembling as he worked to free Shadow from the debris. "You're going to be okay," Keanu murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Just hold on, buddy." With a final heave, Keanu pushed the branch aside. Shadow let out a low whimper but didn't flinch as Keanu carefully lifted him. The wolf's fur was singed, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle, but his eyes met Keanu's with a quiet determination. Even now, he wasn't giving up. Keanu carried Shadow the rest of the way, his strength fueled by sheer willpower. When they finally reached the top, the girl and the man were waiting, firefighters rushing to their aid. Shadow remained limp in Keanu's arms, his breathing shallow but steady. "Get him help," Keanu said urgently, handing Shadow over to a waiting medic. The wolf let out a soft whine, his eyes never leaving Keanu's as they loaded him into the truck. Weeks later, the fires had been extinguished, and life had begun to return to the charred forest. Shadow had survived his injuries, Though his recovery was slow, Keanu had stayed by his side through every moment, refusing to leave him even when the wolf's prognosis seemed uncertain. Now, as the sun set over their newly built sanctuary, Keanu stood on the porch, Shadow at his side. The wolf's leg was wrapped in a bandage, but his posture was strong, his golden eyes scanning the open fields. The sanctuary was a place of hope, a haven for animals displaced by the fire, a dream Keanu had built for Shadow and for every creature that deserved a second chance. "You're a hero. You know that," Keanu said softly, his hand resting on Shadow's head. The wolf let out a low huff, his tail flicking in quiet acknowledgement. As the first stars appeared in the sky, Shadow lifted his head and let out a long, haunting howl. The sound echoed across the sanctuary, a testament to survival, loyalty, and the bond that had carried them through the flames. Keanu stood beside him, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Together, they were a symbol of resilience and freedom, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, courage and loyalty could triumph. Their journey wasn't over, but for now, they had found their place, a sanctuary where they could heal, grow, and inspire others to believe in the extraordinary power of trust and love. Before we close this chapter, I want to hear from you. Did Shadow and Keanu's story touch your heart? If it did, show your love and comment the number 2 below. It's a simple way to say this story reached your soul. If you think we could do better, be honest and comment the number 7. Your feedback helps us grow. But here's where you can truly make a difference. Share this story with someone who loves tales of bravery, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. Let Shadow and Keanu's journey inspire others, just as it's inspired us. And if you're ready to be part of a community where stories like this come to life, subscribe to Tapestry of Worlds now. Hit that bell icon so you never miss a moment. And join us as we weave together tales that stir your heart and spark your imagination. Together, let's build a world of connection, courage, and hope, one story at a time.